probably won't shorten the illness, and in most cases, it's probably going to prolong it. Some of the data here are legitimately striking. When initiated within 24 hours of symptom onset, there was a 40% improvement in global severity score. Also, a 36% reduction in over-the-counter medication use and a 35% reduction in household transmission. Host biology matters more than almost anything else you can do once you're already sick. Antibiotics provide absolutely no benefit in symptom duration or severity and are associated with increased adverse effects. So you got sick and you want to know, what can I do to get better, right? That's one of the most common questions I get. It's deceptively simple. People ask me, what should I take when I'm sick? And my honest answer, the one that people don't always like, is I don't really know. And that's not because there's nothing helpful that we can talk about, but because that question assumes something that isn't true. It assumes that the immune system is just one thing, right? It needs to be boosted, right? Boost your immune system. And that there's a supplement or a protocol that reliably does that for everyone. But the immune system isn't just a switch we can turn on and off. It's not a dial. It's a complex, adaptive network with multiple arms, feedback loops, brakes, accelerators, and trade-offs. Some people lean towards excessive inflammation. Others mount a weak, early sort of like antiviral response. Some clear viruses really quickly, but pay for it later with prolonged inflammation. Others struggle to clear the virus at all. So when someone asks, what should I do when I'm sick? What they're really asking is, how do I manipulate a system that we haven't measured at a phase of illness we haven't defined, using tools that often push in more than one direction at the same time? And that's why the advice feels so inconsistent, right? One person swears by like vitamin C, it saved them, right? Another says zinc made them nauseated. Another says, I doubled my vitamin D dose, but I still got sick. And none of those people are lying, right? They're just different hosts. One of the biggest mistakes that we make with respiratory infections is assuming that the symptoms are the enemy, like fever and fatigue and body aches, appetite loss, right? These aren't design flaws that we should fight. They're adaptive responses. Fever slows down the viral replication. Fatigue forces energy conservation. Losing your appetite, it shifts metabolic resources towards immune function. And that doesn't mean that suffering is virtuous, but it does mean that reflexively suppressing your symptoms, especially early, probably won't shorten the illness, and in most cases, it's probably going to prolong it. And that's why I'm cautious about like the idea of aggressively reducing inflammation the moment someone gets sick. Because early inflammation is often part of effective viral clearance. And the problem isn't just inflammation, it's a dysregulated inflammation. Which brings us to a more interesting strategy. And this is what I normally sort of lean into. Instead of trying to boost or suppress the immune system, what if we target the virus itself? And that's why there's been a lot of interest in things like saline rinses and nasal hygiene and diluted povidone iodine sprays. Now, most respiratory viruses, we're going to talk about this later, but they're usually viruses, they replicate heavily in the nasal passages early on in an infection. If you reduce the viral burden there, then in theory, you change the trajectory. Some of the data here are legitimately striking. A 2025 double-blind randomized controlled trial of 260 adults found that povidone iodine diluted to 0.5%, it was a nasal spray, it showed clinically meaningful benefits when it initiated within 24 hours of symptom onset. There was a 40% improvement in global severity score. This suggests that the timing of the initiation may be critical. Saline irrigation may be equally or even more effective. A large UK trial of almost 14,000 subjects found that both gel-based and saline nasal sprays reduced illness duration by almost 2 days and reduced antibiotic use by more than 30% compared to usual care. And then a different randomized control trial of hypertonic saline nasal irrigation again showed 2 days shorter illness duration, also a 36% reduction in over-the-counter medication use and a 35% reduction in household transmission. Now, your spouse and your kids, they'll probably thank you for that. But while these nasal antiseptics may reduce transmission risk or early viral burden, they don't override host biology, which brings us to the next part of this conversation that actually explains almost everything. Host biology matters more than almost anything else you can do once you're already sick. So when researchers look at who gets sicker from upper respiratory viral infections, not just COVID, but like influenza and other respiratory tract infections, the strongest predictors are not supplements, right? They're obesity, insulin resistance, metabolic disease, hypertension, cardiovascular disease. And it's not just a correlation, it's causation, right? So in a landmark influenza study, researchers concluded that obesity increased the duration of influenza A virus shedding in adults, meaning that people with obesity remained infectious for longer periods than lean individuals. So during COVID, this pattern was repeated again and again in different studies. In one cohort, patients with obesity had a positive SARS-CoV-2 swab test for an average of 19 days compared to just 13 days for non-obese individuals. They also required longer oxygen support and had significantly longer hospital stays. Now, the authors stated it plainly that obesity may impact SARS-CoV-2 shedding and suggested that isolation guidelines might need to be personalized for individuals with obesity. In other words, since obese individuals have a longer duration of viral shedding, the data suggests that obese individuals should have isolated longer than non-obese individuals. But this isn't just about immune signaling in the body, right? At a cellular level, airway epithelial cells, the cells that cover the lungs and the inside, from obese individuals show greater viral entry and replication. The virus isn't just like encountering a different immune system, it's entering a completely different cellular environment that's more permissive for replication. And this helps explain what clinicians observed in real life. Two people get exposed at the same time, same virus, same age. One is sick for 3 days, the other one is sick for 2 weeks, and it just can't be cleared. But by the time symptoms appear, much of that outcome has already been predetermined. This leads to an uncomfortable but important truth. You can't suddenly reverse insulin resistance when you're sick. You can't suddenly get rid of obesity when you're in the middle of an upper respiratory infection. You can't reprogram the immune metabolic signaling overnight, right? Which means that most of the leverage that people want when they ask, what should I take when I'm sick? It actually exists between infections, not during them. Now that said, people still want to know, what can they reasonably do when they are sick? So let's talk about that. And we'll keep it grounded and conservative and evidence-based. So first of all, rest and sleep. Cancel the hard workouts. Don't push through. Sleep is more important than usual. Second, hydration and warmth. Mild to moderate fever is actually adaptive, right? Let the body do what it's designed to do. Your body's creating a fever because it helps slow down viral replication. So maybe don't fight it so much. Fluids with electrolytes are better than plain water alone. Now, obviously, you can't let fever get excessively high, but keep it reasonable. Third is nutrition. This is not the time for like aggressive fasting. Immune responses are metabolically expensive, and adequate calories and protein are important for recovery. Fourth, some light movement is good, right? If tolerated. Maybe some short walks, gentle mobility, nothing that spikes the heart rate or leaves you drained afterwards. If movement worsens symptoms, then that's your answer. And now the thing that people want the most, supplements, right? The easy button. But unfortunately, there are very few supplements with consistent or even modest evidence across populations. So first of all, zinc, taken early, appears to modestly reduce the duration of symptoms when it's dosed appropriately. But higher doses increase nausea and adverse effects. Vitamin C may reduce symptom duration in some individuals, but it doesn't really prevent infection from happening in the first place. Vitamin D should be maintained at usual doses and not suddenly increased or decreased. If you already take it, stay consistent. If you don't, then acute megadosing is really not supported by any good literature. So you got to keep in mind, these are not cures, right? They're marginal aids at best. And what I would not recommend is suddenly stacking all these immune active supplements in a panic. More is not safer, and more is not often better. But we also have to address sort of the elephant in the room here, which is antibiotics. Antibiotics do not shorten illness duration or reduce the risk of severe outcomes in most upper respiratory infections. And we're talking 98% of them. For the common cold, acute purulent rhinitis, which would be a runny nose or mucus production, and laryngitis, antibiotics provide absolutely no benefit in symptom duration or severity and are associated with increased adverse effects. A Cochrane review, which is kind of the gold standard of all reviews, they reviewed 11 trials and found no difference in cure rates or symptom persistence between antibiotics and placebo for the common cold. But adverse effects were more than doubled in adults who received the antibiotics. So antibiotics should be reserved for select confirmed bacterial infections, certainly not viral upper respiratory infections. And finally, when should you call your doctor or go to the ER? Well, first of all, if the fever is persistently very high and it's not coming down. Secondly, if breathing becomes labored or oxygen levels drop. If chest pain or confusion or dehydration or much worsening symptoms after the initial improvement occurs, that is a red flag. That would be something called double sickening. If you're immunocompromised or elderly, or you have significant underlying disease, or if symptoms escalate, those would all be the reasons why maybe you should call your doctor or go to the ER. But those are not situations to just push through. So here's the real takeaway. The most effective way to get sick less often and to recover faster when you do is not some last-minute supplement. It's improving metabolic health, it's reducing chronic inflammation, it's addressing obesity, it's improving sleep, it's supporting cardiovascular health. Now I understand YouTube is for clicks and things like that, and I know this video is certainly not exciting advice. It doesn't sell protocols, it doesn't sell supplements, but it does explain why acute interventions so often disappoint and why prevention actually works. So the next time you ask, hey, what should I take when I'm sick? A better question might be, what kind of host am I creating for the next infection? Because by the time the virus shows up, most of the story has already been written.